Welcome back. Lecture 4. We're finishing up talking about the videos and the articles that are in your Blackboard section for this part of the course. Want to talk about the video about colorblind racism. Not to be confused with I Don't See Race, that other video. In the video, they talk about the 5 strategies often employed by folks hey, wow, first one is an avoidance tactic. I don't ever use that N word, but my friend told me a story. They move the idea of racism around by saying things like, some of my best friends are black. Number 3, projection. Talking about reverse racism or, those people, that's just all in their head. Or they diminish it. I don't know about African Americans in my neighborhood, or I don't know if it's okay for race mixing and dating. And then number 5, which I think has been a current favorite in our political comment, is just incoherent babbling, where like one of our presidential candidates in 2015 said things like, the immigrants from Mexico, they're rapists, they're drug dealers, they're murderers, and I'm sure some fine people. Like, that's incoherent babbling. All of these are strategies to try to basically have it not be something that we talk about. Like, there's really no reason to talk about racism. There's reverse racism, and it hardly ever happens, and it's all in their head. And these isolated incidents, all of which work to try to honestly defeat the idea of talking honestly about racism. The article called Colorblind Racism by Eduardo Bonilla Silva, he brings up some interesting points that I wanted to discuss real quickly. One is how modern, particularly like white liberalism, it'll accept reparations for Jews, saying, it's okay for them to have Palestine, even though that wasn't where they were living. It's okay for Japanese Americans to get reparations for being interned. But slavery, that's too much. And so he talks about there being sort of 3 strategies. One is, it's just not reasonable. It's not reasonable to talk about reparations. 2 is this refilling the idea of meritocracy, that, affirmative action, we don't need to do that anymore. We need to do away with it. It's already accomplished what it's supposed to do. And number 3, the natural course, the way it is, hey, listen, this is just the way it is. It's okay for the system to continue on, which again benefits clearly one group over another. There were 2 written articles, Critical Race, Chapter 1, and Discussion of Critical Race Theory, Chapter 2. In one, it gives kind of a clunky version of what critical race theory is, a collection of activists and scholars that discuss race and power and questions legal reasoning, rationalism, and constitutional law. What I want you to know and put in your notes is institutions, that it affects institutions and systems. Chapter 1 there it goes in the 1970s. Civil rights had stalled, and there's a question, why? Why has the civil rights movement stalled? And they come up with a theory, power. People in power didn't really like that, and they were doing everything they can to thwart it. That it's the sort of chip away at Brown versus Board by some very narrow court decisions. Chip away at civil rights by, again, narrowing it should. Chip away at the idea of social justice, that we don't need it, it's not right. And one of the things that is considered problematic about critical race theory is that it has an activist component. Unlike other academic things where we academics get to just write papers or read books and talk to ourselves, critical race theory kind of demands of people that, hey, listen, if you see this, you got to go do something about it. You can't talk about a house being on fire. You got to try to put it out. Now, the tenets, racism has become normalized. It's normalized in science and schools and courts. It's become okay for a certain level of racism to be just accepted by all the actors in those systems and institutions. Number two, it makes white elites an advantageous position. It makes money. Being racist and having the white dominance that we see, it makes elites money and material advantage. It makes the white working class, quite honestly, an advantage emotionally. They feel upset and want to be better than somebody else. And number three, race is a construction. It isn't the natural way of things. Chapter 2, we get in a little bit deeper, the difference between idealists and realists within critical race theory itself. Idealists focus on the social construction of the ideas, and the realists are saying, hey, it's more than just a constructed set of ideas. It's the allocation of resources that are done by that. So, for instance, in Texas, anti-Mexican articles in newspapers, discussions, painting Mexicans as being inferior, painting them as being threatening somehow. And that at the end it was okay to take their land because they were so inferior and foreign and whatever. Now again, white people in Texas, former part of Mexico, now claim that Mexicans are inferior and don't deserve their own land. If you think about that, we've done that before. Native Americans. We'll talk about that later. You see what, from the realist side, they go, well, there's a majority view and there's often a minority view about how something like a big decision like Brown versus Board is actually played out. Not what we think about, banging a drum saying, wow, aren't we so great that we've made this decision, but how it really has affected folks and how it was really implemented. The realists point to a set of actions. They point to unionization, prison industrial complex, immigration policy, that in the end, rights can be diluted. Like I can say hateful things and call it free speech. Idealists, on the other hand, tend to focus on, hey, we all have free speech and we should look at how people are using stereotypes and tort and legal reforms. And basically, I would say that the difference between idealist and realist is really very much an academic debate. Obviously, to be effective, you have to confront both things, right? You have to be able to understand how people construct ideas, how they use that in speech and stereotypes, but also what's the brass tack? What's the nuts and bolts of how does that come out? And it's clear that at times racial hierarchies, white people reward other white people in cities and states all across the country. They also point out that, why is it we only have one word for racism when there's so many different kinds of interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and how those different effects, and that, perhaps that poverty of language isn't really helping us out very much. Then there's the video, John Oliver. Just go to 16 for John Oliver, 16 minutes. That's all you have to do. It's 28 minutes long. You only have to go to minute 16. And again, we see this fear-mongering by conservatives. Critical race theory is being taught in the schools, and it's made, it's painting Western civilization and Christianity as bad, and I'm sad about that, and don't make my kids understand that. First of all, it's not being taught in school. That's ridiculous. And a telling thing when Tucker Carlson from Fox News says, he admits it, I don't even know what it is, but I'm against it. That should be a clue. Again, probably actually a better version of what critical race theory is, that racism is embedded in our systems and in our institutions. It's not just a product of individual or an individual racist. It's in our systems, how they were put together, and they continue on. That it's not actually anti-American, and it's not teaching anyone to hate themselves. It's actually a legal theory that you would only get to really in graduate school. Like, you, having watched this video, has gotten as more critical race theory than just about anybody outside of a graduate legal program. It's clearly there was a goal, and the Christopher Rufo guy getting Fox to react, and clearly a long range. This was filmed in 2022, and now you see DEI and other things being taken out of state government, federal government. It was clearly very effective, and he had a goal, and that goal was to quote unquote liberate schools from school choice. And we know, having looked at it, for instance, we've seen a couple of years of Arizona trying the school choice thing. The money actually went to people that were already registered in private schools that were considered affluent, more than middle class, almost all white. School choice isn't used to liberate. It's used to do exactly what it was when it first was concocted back in the 70s, when they actually were very straightforward and called them segregation academies. And how does that play out? Well, again, he talks about Florida, that, it talks about Christianity and slavery in the textbook. He also mentioned, and this is not in this video, but I want you to be able to go look up. Her name is Jane Elliott. You can find her on YouTube or TikTok. And she did the blue eye, brown eye experiment. And while they were saying it's terrible and mean of an experiment, you see that when she told these kids, little kids, first, second graders, something from her power as a teacher, they believed it. And then she allocated resources based on who had blue eyes and brown eyes. And that demonstration of power really got those kids to behave and act in a way that was really disturbing if you actually watch a TikTok or a video of it. Our magic word for this lecture is author Leroy Jones. He changed his name to Amiri Baraka. He wrote a book called Blues People. Fantastic book. And fits into what we're discussing really now, which is European immigration and why that is so important. Because we're going to talk about Native Americans, but honestly, the problems in race and ethnicity come from when white people, Europeans, come here. And the power of their technology and their use of violence and a practiced racism that extended over Muslim folks in Africa, black folks that they created an industrial slave trade, indigenous people that they encountered. And again, that religion, it was blessed by Catholics, then Protestants in the United States. The use of this power, the use of this concept, you see over and over. But one of the things that we need to recognize is, as race is constructed, we also construct and make up white people. So when the first folks get here, they're from England. The next group is the Irish. The Irish weren't white people. They were hyphenated. They were Irish Americans, or just the Irish. Followed then by the Germans and the Italians and Sicilians and Jews. In 1920, we actually put a stop to immigration because people are so threatened by immigration. And after the 1920s, you start seeing white people as an idea being constructed. Now suddenly, well, the Irish and maybe the Germans are okay. Maybe they're white people. And then the Italians and maybe Jews are okay. And you can see this tension between, let's say, the English nativists. That was what they called themselves, nativists, the English Americans versus Irish Americans in a movie called The Gangs of New York. It's actually a fairly accurate film. We see in 1922, make a note of this, we see the court labeling what white is. And that's only important if you're allocating resources. We have the Singh case, Singhh, and the Ozawa case. In both cases, a man from India and a Japanese person were not considered white. They weren't considered white. Asian was not white. And you go, okay, well, why do I got to know all of this? Well, our version of this, starting with Jim Crow, Plessy versus Ferguson, the pseudoscience of eugenics, we create this idea that racism is important and needs to continue to be done over and over and over. And the outcome of that actually is the codes that the Nazis used in Germany. The Nuremberg codes were actually an outgrowth of our own version of what is white enough, what percentage of blood is black. And the legacy of that, quite honestly, is we took land from Native Americans, we took labor from African Americans, and it reifies and supports the idea of continued white supremacy, because white people go, oh, well, look at all the success we've had, and without recognizing, yeah, if you've got the land relatively free and the labor for free, you're probably going to be successful. Wow, what a great success you are. And not acknowledging that is a kind of ongoing colorblind racism. All right, that's lecture 4.